I got married a little bit older and I had my first child a little bit older in my life. I was 38. And, when you have this child and you get pregnant, you find out you're pregnant, you're so excited. You're like, this is going to be great. And we found out it was a boy. And oh my gosh, this is awesome. And then at about 29 weeks, you go into the doctor and they look at you and they go, you got to go to the hospital because something, you have no amniotic fluid and you got to be admitted. So, anyway, it all started with that. And I was in the hospital for 3 weeks. And then he came and we had to do kind of an emergency C-section at 32 weeks. He was only 3 pounds when he was born. And he had to stay in the NICU. So that's kind of how the story began with him. Because he was in the NICU, he was followed by the hospital for many years, for about 2 years after he was born. And the every time we would go in, they would do, milestones, do a few testing, just to make sure that he was progressing, that he was, growing and hitting his milestones. And it got to a point where he was kind of behind. And then it got to a point where they're like, hey, there's something here that you need to kind of watch out for. And so that's when I started searching and trying to figure out, what do I do? How do I do this? And so we ended up with an occupational therapist who helped me get into the state funded program here. And when that happened, it was when we started, okay, there's something here. We really need to start working on this. My son didn't speak until he was about 4 years old. And we actually have a video of him for the first time he said like independently a word, and his word was more. And so we have that on video, and it's probably one of my sweetest, like most cherished videos ever. And his first diagnosis was speech therapy. It was a speech problem, and it was called childhood apraxive speech. And from there, it just kept adding. So he has ADHD, oh, he has this, or he has that. And then it just kept adding on, and we're kind of just putting band-aids here and there. And when he was about, it was probably about 2 years ago, we were finally approved to do a genetic test, and we did that. And because we had done so many other testings before and everything was negative, I was expecting this call that was going to be, everything is negative. It's just what it is. And it wasn't. He had a diagnosis, and it's called TBR1. When he was first diagnosed, there were 60 kids in the world diagnosed with it. Now we actually have about 190 kids. So he's one out of 190 in the world with this diagnosis. And this diagnosis actually was not even tested for until about 3 years ago. And so any kid that had a genetic testing before 3 years ago, they wouldn't have this diagnosis. Anyway, since the diagnosis, nothing has really changed. We just know that there is this genetic disorder. We continue to do the same therapies. We continue to do everything. And he's doing really well. He's 10. He speaks with, it's hard to understand him, but he's doing well. So this is kind of the story. This is how we ended up to talking about this, because I was telling you a little earlier, like I am finally at a point where I feel like, okay, I kind of have this a little bit. So I can probably help the people who have nothing. They just don't even know where to look or what to do. So that's what I'm doing now.
So when you realized that this was going to be your journey, you and your family with your child, was it something that caught you off guard, or is it something that in a way you were maybe a little bit prepared for because you always wanted to be a parent and you kind of were in the state of mind that it doesn't matter what happens, I know that I'm going to make sure that my child is loved and I'm doing the best that I can.
I think that there's a little bit of both. I think that when you find out you're pregnant, you kind of have these expectations, these things in your head, in your mind. You know, I'm going to have this boy, he's going to grow up. My husband, I'm sure he was thinking he's going to be an NBA player or an NFL football player. You know, that's what's going on through his head. And in my mind, I'm like, well, maybe he's going to be a doctor, he's going to be something. You know, you kind of have those expectations for your child. You kind of make that, you know, this life. And when you are hit with obstacles in your life, in his life, then it's hard. And that is probably one of the hardest things that I have ever had to do in my life was to realign and reprogram what I thought life was going to be to what life has actually was actually happening, what was at the time. So I think that if you talk to any special needs parents, I don't think they were ever really expecting something to happen. You know, I think it just comes and we go along with it as they come, and you learn along with your child.
I know some parents, when they found out that their child was special needs, they went through two stages from what they described to me. Um, there was some people that felt that maybe there was something that they did that caused this.
Hmm,
Some parents, I know it's strange, right? Some parents
it's not.
wondered how are we going to um continue forward because now the demands is different. So when I look at both of those scenarios, I look at it as, when I spoke to them, I asked them the question. I was like, okay, that's pretty interesting because I don't have any children, and that may be true for a lot of parents. They may think, oh, you know what, if I didn't smoke, if I didn't do this, if I lost weight, whatever the case is, right? You begin to maybe guilt yourself into thinking that somehow you caused it, or some other people they'll blame God, right? But in both
Mm-hmm.
scenarios, when I've asked people, I said, don't you think this is a little bit of you projecting onto the child that just needs you in that moment? And it's, to me, on the outside looking, it's no different than you have a child that is quote unquote not special needs, or what some people call it, that was born healthy. It just seems that sometimes some people have the expectation when a child is born, it's essentially born perfect, and then society kind of makes it imperfect, versus no, when a child is born, it's a parent's responsibility to make sure that the child is raised to the best of their ability and they provide the best environment possible for the child. But what are your thoughts on some people who may think that maybe they've done something, or maybe this is not what they necessarily signed up for and they don't know how they're going to proceed further because now the demands are a little bit greater?
So, first of all, for 8 years, I thought that my son had the issues that he had because I ate too much Taco Bell and drank too much Dr. Pepper while I was pregnant with him. I was like, did I do this? Did I not count the kicks correctly? Could I have done anything differently to make sure that this didn't happen to him? And I lived with that for a long time. And I don't think that it's a choice of thinking those things. I think as a mother, you kind of have that, and it's normal to have those thoughts. But for us, for me, when I received the diagnosis, it was like, okay, I didn't do anything. It was when he was formed, his DNA had an issue. right? This little letter on his TBR1 was inverted. So for me, that was a huge stress relief, that a guilt was taken off of my back, right? Now, for parents that get are blessed with these children, and sometimes, and I'm going to tell you, it is a hard thing. It is hard. The amount of work and the amount of effort you need to put into their education, their therapies, the doctors that they're seeing, the bringing a team together, you lose yourself. You really do.